Hey everyone, this is Brian Cognato with Senior Court. We are just at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us here for our latest Tuesday talk, this one focusing on the Program Operations Handbooks. Really fantastic resource that we're going to dive deep into and really just spend a lot of hands-on time with today. Before we get started, I always do like to do a little bit of a mic check and make sure that I'm getting through okay. So if you're in the webinar where you can send us a little chat message, I would love it if you could send through a smiley face or a thumbs up or an okay or whatever you want really, just to let us know that you can hear me okay. I see Dawn started us off with a heart, very appropriate on Valentine's Day. Thanks for another Dawn and Suzanne and Kimberly from Lexington and all of you for letting us know that we are in fact getting through all right. Sounds wonderful. I am thrilled to be joined by two of my colleagues here today. They're actually going to do most of the talk, and I just want to give them a chance to say hello as well. Jane, can you go ahead and just say hello for us?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jane. And Tara.
Hi, everyone. This is Tara.
Thanks, Tara and Jane. We'll talk about them and why they're so they're such amazing resources for us here in just a minute. But let's go on ahead and just cover some housekeeping notes. These will be familiar to many of you who've joined us in this space before. All lines are on mute at this time, so if you're speaking and we can't hear you, don't worry, that's okay. That's the way it's intended. This session is being recorded. We post the recording on the Senior Core Training Calendar, typically within a week, and we also are now posting recordings of our Tuesday talks in Litmus, the CNCS Learning Management System. Right now, they're organized topically, but in the future, we'll probably actually create a Tuesday talk heading, so you can get to all the Tuesday talks. There are two ways to get audio for today. You can do that either by using the audio connection through your computer, or you can call in. If you're in the webinar space, I'm going to paste the call-in information in the chat box so you have it handy. If you have problems with one kind of connection, try the other kind of connection because they are both available. We're going to be doing a lot of show and tell today. We're really going to be spending most of our time in the handbooks itself, so we really strongly recommend joining for the video portion. You can find a link to join our webinar on the Managing Senior Core Grants page if you follow the link for training and technical assistance calls. If not, I do recommend at least having your handbook handy. And particularly, it'll be useful if you can have it online because we're really going to explore the online capabilities of the handbook today. If you have a problem with the video connection at any time, we recommend just disconnecting and reconnecting. It's infrequent, but it does happen, and we find that that takes care of most of the challenges. Finally, you can ask questions at any time via the chat box. We are going to keep all of our lines on mute. This is quite a large call, and that's really how we're going to have the best experience here today, cut down on distractions and background noise. But at any time, if you're in the webinar, feel free to put a question in using the chat box, and we'll pick it up as we go. Sometimes we may need to wait a little bit to pick it up to make sure we get through a piece of content. But don't worry, it's not going to be lost, and we'll be sure to pick up all the questions. We're going to do one more little bit of housekeeping before we move on. Those of you who are in the webinar are going to see a poll come up on your screen very soon. It's a one-question poll, and we want to know what program you are here representing, including if you're representing more than one program. So go ahead and just tell us what program you are. If you can use that poll, that'd be great. I see some people dropping into the chat box. That's fine too, but if you put it in with a poll, we can really start to tease out some trends. Okay, we've got a fair number of responses. I see a Deb, a proud SCP. Always love to see the small but mighty senior companion program represented. Looking at the numbers, we've got a good chunk of RSVP grantees, a little bit more than half. And then we've got another 15% who are representing more than one program. Thanks very much for that. You're going to see the slides come back up on the screen soon. This is just good for us to know as we go through. We've got a broad base of people here with a particular concentration in RSVP. And we'll be looking at the handbooks from across different programs here today. So don't worry, we'll make sure we include some content relevant to everybody. We've got 4 major objectives. We're going to review the purpose of the handbooks and their connection to other information. We're going to demonstrate some of their key features, and we're going to highlight major updates since the 2008 version. Astute senior core readers and followers will know that we actually just updated these handbooks just a few months ago, actually just 1 month ago in January. That wasn't a very major update. We kind of tinkered around the edges. Back in the summer, we did a pretty big update from 2008. And when I say we, I really mean Jane and Tara, our speakers here. And we're going to be really looking at this holistically from that last major update. So we're not just going to be focusing on the tinkering around the edges that we just did. Instead, everything that's new since the 2008 versions. And then finally, we're going to share how you can get us feedback on the handbooks and some next steps that we have planned. In honor of Valentine's Day, I do want to talk a little bit just about focus. We're going to be focused here today. These handbooks are incredible, comprehensive, deep resources, and we're going to be focused on those 4 objectives. Those 4 objectives that I just talked about, which is really about using the handbooks as a tool. And that's because if we don't focus, then you won't know what we're looking at. You will get that blurry rose, and nobody wants a blurry rose. We want a nice, crisp, clear rose so we can actually see it's a rose. What that means is in this space, we might not have time to talk about, I should say that more strongly. In this space, we won't have time to talk about how a particular piece of the handbook might apply to your program. We're not going to be able to really solve program-specific issues about this or that piece of guidance. And that's because if we tried to do that, if we didn't focus, we'd just wind up with a mess. And we don't want to do that. We want to wind up with a clear, focused training. So we're really going to limit ourselves to looking at the handbooks as a tool and not interpreting specific guidance. When it comes to interpreting specific guidance, applying it to your program, as always, your program officer is the best bet to do it. So that's just a little bit of expectation setting there. As I mentioned, we're very lucky to have 2 speakers here with us today, Jane Quist and Tara Mainers. Their biographies are up on the screen right now, and I should mention this. We'll also post these slides after the fact so you can go look at them afterwards. They are incredible resources for Senior Core and CNCS. They've got a broad range of experience in training and also in actually running Senior Core programs, even here at headquarters on the Senior Core team. And what's most incredible about them is the amount of work that they have done to update these handbooks since 2008. And maintain them. And also, they're the 2 primary movers behind another valuable resource for all our Senior Core grantees, the new Project Director's Orientation that many of you may be familiar with. I've got a little bit of a song and dance to do here at the beginning, but then I'm going to hand it off to them, and you're in good hands because these tools really are their brainchild, and I can't thank them enough for all that they have done to support Senior Core programs, and I'm really thrilled to have them here with us. So we're going to hand it off to them in just a minute to really look at these handbooks in more depth. But I want to start by just laying a little bit of groundwork about how we look at the handbooks and how you can think about them as a tool. And I really see them playing 2 roles. These handbooks can be thought of as a supplement or as a door. As a supplement or as a door. What does that actually mean? What does it mean to say that the handbooks are a supplement? Well, as many of you know, when we manage a Senior Core grant, we've got different levels of information, different layers of information, you might say. It all starts with statute down at the bottom, which is made by Congress. It's binding law. You'll often see it annotated in the way that you see on the screen right now, 42 USC 12645G. Bonus points if anybody in the chat can tell me what that law refers to. You'll get a little gold star if you can tell me what that law refers to. Or they often have proper names, like the Serve America Act. And that's where all of our programs here at CNCS get started. They get started in Congress, when Congress gets together and makes a law that says we, the U.S. government, will do X, and we'll do it with these rules and these provisions. And that's where we start. Then what happens is CNCS interprets that statute, and we do that through regulation. Regulation is something, again, that's I expect familiar to all of you. It looks like that 45 CFR 2551, 2552, or 2553. And of course, those are the regulations for each of our 3 programs. What's important about regulation is it has basically the same effect as statute, but it's a little bit more flexible. CNCS has control over it, whereas we don't have control over statute. And regulation is limited by statute. We can never make a regulation that contradicts statute in any way. So those are the first two layers, and I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with those. But then we build on it again with our terms and conditions. Right? The terms and conditions, as I hope you all know, come with your grant, and they're really contractual obligations. We typically have two, general and specific terms and conditions, general applying to everyone, specific applying to as you might expect, specific program. Right? So we've started at statute, the U.S. Congress getting together and saying, hey, here's what we need to do. They then hand it off to CNCS, and we say, okay, here's how this program's going to work within the bounds of that statute. And then we go one step further, and when we give a grant out to a sponsor, we say, sponsor, here are the terms and conditions, the things you are agreeing to when you take this money. So it's still binding, and it's got this contractual relationship. And then on top of all of that is guidance. And guidance explains, it clarifies, and it assists. And the reason why we're spending all this time talking about it now is because the handbooks are a great example of guidance. The handbooks can never go beyond terms and conditions, or I should say, can never go above terms and conditions. They need to be based on the terms and conditions, and they can explain, clarify, and assist you all with implementing it. But again, they are limited by the terms and conditions, just like those are limited by regulation, just like those are limited by statute. All of that matters because of this very, very, very important point. And if you take nothing away from this call, I think you will all take a lot away from this call, but if you take nothing away from this call except one thing, take this away. If there is a conflict between the contents of the handbook and law and regulation or the terms and conditions, the regulations, the terms and conditions, and statute, those are the controlling authority. The handbook can assist, can clarify, can supplement, but it can never go beyond those. Similarly, I like to look at this a little bit like a food pyramid. You shouldn't just be relying on what's at the top of the food pyramid, right? You shouldn't just be relying on those chips and snacks. Instead, you need to have a little bit of everything that comes before, right? So don't just rely only on the handbook. Know your terms and conditions, know your regulations, and yeah, you should even know the statute. And that's how you'll be set up for senior course success. Again, because all of these things that go before the guidance inform the guidance. So what do we mean when we talk about it like a door? Well, the way the handbooks are meant to function is we've got a lot of different guidance out there, a lot of information. And it sometimes, I have to admit, lives in strange places. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to find what you're looking for when you're looking for a specific piece of guidance or a specific tool. So we've tried to start to pull all that together into the operations handbook, which means when all of you are using them, you can think about them as the door to many different types of information. You can start at the handbook and hopefully it'll point you to where you need to go. So maybe you're thinking, oh, I want a specific template. Well, hopefully you can start in the handbook and it can help you get to that specific template. Maybe you're thinking, I wish I knew the regulation to cite for this particular requirement. Well, you can start at the handbook and it should point you to the right regulation. It's a portal, an entryway into all the different types of information that we have made available to you and hope to keep making available to you. So that's just a high-level idea about how we see this fitting into our information environment generally, the roles we hope they can play. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to our speakers to start to show you how some of this works in a more specific way. But try to keep this background in mind as we go, because I think it'll help explain the way some of these things are set up. And with that, I will hand it off to Tara and Jane.
Thanks, Brian. We are going to start off in the RSVP handbook. If we could bring that up.
It's coming up right now. Just a minute.
Thank you. So we're going to start with the RSVP table of contents page. Includes the first handbook that was released last summer. And the first big change that you'll notice from the 2008 handbook is the addition of embedded links. An embedded link is just another way to say that when you click on it, it takes you somewhere else. A lot of you are already familiar with this type of feature in documents, as we use this quite frequently, but it is new to the handbooks. Most of the embedded links in the handbooks are in blue, except for the table of contents. So you'll see the table of contents here is in black font, but you can click on them and it will take you directly to the specific chapter or section or appendices that you would like to find. We are going to look at chapter 1, page 1. So you can click on the table of contents and it should take you directly to the page you're looking for. We use these embedded links in the handbook to link to both appendices and linking to websites or documents outside of the handbook. Some of our documents live online, so they can be updated regularly and you can always have the most current information on a specific topic. For example, you'll see our terms and conditions here are highlighted in blue. And clicking on the terms and conditions will take you outside of the document to nationalservice.gov, specifically on the page where you will find the terms and conditions from the last several years all in one place. Thank you, Brian.
Tara, I see that some people are saying that they're not seeing anything. If you're not seeing anything, please go ahead and disconnect and reconnect. If you're not seeing portions of the page, that's intentional to make sure that certain things are legible. We have to zoom in a little bit, which means sometimes we won't see the whole page. I do see that the sound is unclear for someone. Tara is coming through here. Christine says that you may also need to hit accept meeting content. So again, if you're having audio problems, we recommend just trying the other form of connection. Sorry to interrupt there, Tara. Please go ahead and continue.
No, absolutely. We want to make sure that everyone can see and hear me. So that's great. Thank you. We can go back to chapter 1 in the RCP handbook. And from chapter 1, on page 2, we're going to link to Appendix A9. So this is an example of an embedded link that will take you to another part of the document. So this will keep you within the document and take you to an appendices. So Appendix A9 is actually a list of corporation common acronyms that you can see here. But one thing to remember is when you get here, you'll have to scroll back up to the next section, to the section you were reading, or use the home button on your keyboard to bring you back to the title page of the handbook. So this is a large document to work within, but the embedded links do make it easier to get exactly where you need to be. We do recommend using the embedded links in a new tab so that you can move between documents. When you click on an embedded link, I believe you should have the option to open it in a new tab. That may make it easier for you to see all of the information and work with all of the information you need at any given time. So you can see on the screen now, you just click open in a new tab. You can also see the address of the web page by hovering over a link. So if you're wondering where this link is going to take you, you can hover over the link and the URL should pop up. Now, depending on your browser, this may look a little different for you. But if you ever find a broken link or a link that directs you to the wrong page, you can always cut and paste the full URL into your web browser from the cross-reference guide, which Jane is going to discuss as a key feature. Jane, are you available?
Okay, am I off mute now?
Thanks, Jane.
Okay, so I'm gonna, Tara showed you a few of the appendices as embedded links, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the appendices section. Brian, if we can go to the table of contents page again. And the books parallel each other, so when you're looking at the table of contents for the foster grandparents, senior companion, or RSVP, they're very similar. So if you look at what's listed as chapter 14 at the bottom of the table of contents, if Brian's going to click on that, and this will take us to a list of the appendices, because I want to show you a few ways that you can find the appendices documents. So this takes us to pretty much the back of the handbook, the online handbook, and you will see some instructions about the appendices list, and then a list of all the appendices. Because it's easier when we do edits, if we have fewer things to change, it really helps to have links from all three books go to one place. So the documents that apply to all three programs are numbered the same, and then they are numbered, if they are just for RSVP, they're called, they have a B number, a B1, B2, and if it's FGP and SCP both, they're in section C, as you can, Brian's scrolling up so you can see that. And then if it's only for FGP or only for SCP, it's either D or E. So this kind of helps you find the documents, and you can tell by the label what program it works with. So this is one way to find the appendices documents. And then if we can go back to the chapter in the FGP handbook, Brian, page 68, we're going to use an example there to talk about another way to find the appendices documents. As you can see, there's Appendix A3, Guidance for Recognition Cost. This is an information document, so Brian, if you will click that, and it will take us back to chapter 14 where we were, and we can click on A3 and it will take us to the document, or you can scroll down. All of these documents are right behind that page where Brian just clicked. So everything in the handbook is in a PDF format. The handbook is in PDF. So there are two types of documents in the appendices. One's an information document, and the other is sample forms. So let's look at a sample form. If we can go to page 38, Brian, in the FGP handbook, we will see a link for Appendix C1, which is the MOU. So you can click on, if Brian clicks on this, and it will take us back to chapter 14 where we were, and we can either scroll down or click again on the link, and we can look at this in a PDF format. So we look at this MOU and think, that looks really great. I'd like to use that in my program. So, but I really wish this was in a Word document. So it is available in a Word document. And Brian, you don't necessarily need to go through all these steps, but if you go to the Managing Senior Corporate Grants webpage, and that's where you can find the handbooks, you can see this fourth link goes to the handbook appendices. So Brian, would you mind clicking there? And you can see he opened that in a different tab, which is handy. It's on some browsers, it's not on others. So this page, this landing page for the appendices, has all of the documents for all three programs. So Brian, if you'll scroll down and click on the MOU that we just looked at. You can do it in RSVP if you like, since it's right there. C1. So if when you click on this, another page comes up and you have a choice of looking at it in the PDF, which is what you were looking at it in the handbook, or you can open it in a Word document. So this is very handy. You can put your logo, your address, just hopefully that will be a very handy tool for you. And let's see. The one thing that we really want to remind you about these appendices sample forms, these are just samples. You're not required to use these forms. They are hopefully a good tool for you so that if you feel like you need to revise your forms, or if you want to compare something in your forms, then you can use this as a comparison. So they are compliant. They may have things in there that don't apply to your program or that you don't want, but we looked at several samples of MOUs and decided on the ones that are in the appendices. So we hope that they are helpful to you. The next section that we want to look at is the cross-reference index. And Brian, if you could go back to the table of contents, please. And Tara mentioned this briefly. And this is just a tool. It's kind of it can be handy if you're looking for links. I don't know about you, but when I have a reference book, I always like to have a robust index, and excuse me, and the back of the book sometimes is very helpful. So when Brian gets down to chapter 13, it's called the cross-reference index. And I know everyone's screen moves at a different pace slightly than others. So it on my screen is moving kind of slow right now. I don't know why that is. But when we get down to the chapter 13, you'll see that it's called the FGP Handbook Cross-Reference Index. And Brian, would you please click on that? The cross-reference handbook is for a couple of purposes. One is if you find that there's a link that's not working, all the links on the cross-reference index are spelled out, so to speak, the whole URL. So you could copy and paste. You click on a link, you're in chapter 1, this link's not working well, you can just cut or copy and paste this into your browser and find that link. So it's kind of a backup, because sometimes links get broken, and sometimes they work better in Chrome or Internet Explorer or Foxfire, or different ones. So so that's kind of a backup on the links. The other thing that you can do in this section, another thing that's helpful is that everything's listed by chapter. So if you want to find all of the appendices documents from chapter, there are not many in chapter 1, if any, but in a certain chapter you can scroll down here and it has all the links as well as all there's a couple of appendices listed. So hopefully that this is just one more resource for you to find what you're looking for in an easy way. Another thing that you might notice, and this kind of fits in with what Tara was saying about the embedded links. In the past, there were more documents in the appendices than there are now. And you might think, well, you know, I really did like that sample in-kind contribution form that used to be part of the appendices. Well, now, if we look in chapter, I think it's chapter 11, you'll see a link. Oh, sorry, Brian, I meant on the cross-reference form. So sorry to have you jumping around like that. You'll see there's a link to an in-kind document, but it's a link to a page that's put together by our grants officers, sample in-kind contribution form. And so that will take you to not only a sample in-kind contribution form, but some more information about in-kind contributions and match and that sort of thing. So hopefully that this is a better way of organizing things, so that like the door that Brian was talking about, it takes you through to more information. So I think that's about all I need to tell you about the cross-references. Hopefully that will be a useful tool as you work in the handbook. So Brian, let's go back to you.
Okay.
Oh, Tara, back to you.
Thanks, Jane. I do just, so we'll hand it back to Tara, but for me, this is one of the reasons why I think this version of the handbook is so useful. By all means, please feel free to print it out if that's what works for you. But just know if you're looking for some specific resources, if maybe you don't know exactly what you're looking for, it's always a great idea to come online because, again, that's how you really get the most out of this door function. It's like a directory for additional resources. Tara, I think you've got something else to show us.
Yeah, so thanks, Brian. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about effective practices. If we could look at Chapter 7 of the RSVP handbook, you'll see effective practices in RSVP volunteer assignments. So Chapter 7 is about RSVP volunteer assignments, and you'll walk through the chapter with a lot of information. And then at the end of this chapter, you will also see effective practices. An effective practice is just an idea or a suggestion for managing your project that has been recognized to provide positive results. The addition of the effective practices is to offer you additional support for implementing your program in your community at the local level. The ideas here in the effective practices sections are just meant to kind of start you thinking about how you can implement your program, kind of a starting point to talk with your advisory council or your sponsor staff, or even to talk with your program officer if you have questions. Many of the chapters have effective practices, but a couple of them do not have an effective practices section, and that is actually Chapter 3 and Chapter 9. Chapter 3 and Chapter 9 don't have an effective practice section because we cover all of the relevant information within the chapter, and there is no need for an effective practices in those chapters. If we scroll down just a little bit, you will notice that there is an embedded link to V4, which is a sample form, that assignment description form that you can use. And as Jane was saying, you can download the PDF document, or you can download a Word document and edit as you see fit for your uses with your organization. It's important to remember here that the handbooks are a technical assistance guide and not a compliance guide. So just keep that in mind when you're using this handbook and you're going through these links, that this in the effective practice section specifically is a resource for you, but again, it's not a compliance guide. We are going to talk about a few key updates since 2008, and Jane is going to lead us off.
As we make that handoff, I just want to jump in and say I haven't seen any questions come through the chat window yet. There was some technical assistance with some IT problems there. But if anybody has any questions about anything that we're saying, please feel free to drop it into that window, and we will pick it up. Jane, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Brian gave such a good introduction on the pyramid of how the our regs and the handbook and the statutes, everything kind of works together. And so when there are not a lot of changes in the statutes or regulations or terms and conditions, there are not a lot of changes in the handbook. So since 2008, if you compare side by side, there are a lot of things that are still the same because we've had really a minimal amount of change in those underlying documents. But there have been a few changes. If you've been around Senior Corps for a little while, you remember the Kennedy Serve America Act in 2009, and that created some changes. One change that always comes to mind to me quickly is that the age for FGP and SEP volunteers was changed from 60 to 55 for eligibility. So that's something that we've lived with since 2009. So we probably haven't noticed that change that much in the handbook. And there are other changes like that that are a little more subtle, important changes, but subtle. We want to just highlight a couple of changes that are a little more major in the 2016 version of the handbook. The one that I'm going to talk about is that we've incorporated the changes for the uniform guidance. Most of this information is in Chapter 10 on grants management, and this is the chapter that has a lot of fiscal requirements. Again, if you've been around for a few years, you may remember the OMB circulars. The Office of Management and Budget is the federal government's agency that gives us the instructions about how federal grants should be managed, particularly cost principles, administrative requirements, audit requirements, that sort of thing. So you may remember like an A133 or A122 circular and these sorts of things that used to be included in the handbook. Well, in about 2014, OMB worked with federal agencies to make changes in the circulars to streamline it. That time you may have heard of the super circular. Well, this is once it was all completed, it was called the uniform guidance. So, excuse me, in Chapter 10 especially, you'll see these changes and the links to information about the uniform guidance and about the links to the regulations for that. So this Chapter 10 was one of the bigger changes that we had to make when we revised the handbook. And let's see, Tara is going to talk about a couple of other changes.
Thanks, Jane. Yes, we have a couple of other major changes to talk about since 2008. And we are going to Chapter 3, thank you, Brian, for performance measures and evidence-based programming. So there was a major shift from programming for impact to national performance measures. Like Jane mentioned, when Congress passed the Serve America Act, it reauthorized and expanded our national service programs that are administered by the corporation. And as part of this new legislation, performance measures were implemented along with national service criminal history background checks. This handbook has all of the information that you need to get started on both of these topics. So the corporation established a set of performance measures to use common measurable approaches to program implementation and impact. And this is going to be your guide. Chapter 3 will be your guide and your starting point to learning more about performance measures. If you could scroll down to Chapter 3.2. 3.2 in this chapter is about evidence-based programming. This is also new and is a way for the corporation to gain a better understanding of the evidence that supports our program models. Also a way to make sure our programs are having the intended effect. you can, if you'll scroll down to link to the Managing Senior Corps Grants page, the Managing Senior Corps Grants page has specific information on performance measurement requirements for your grant. So you can review Appendix B of the NOFA or of the invitation to apply on this page. All right. So the next update we're going to talk about are the National Service Criminal History Checks. National Service Criminal History Checks also became a requirement due to the Serve America Act and is definitely a major update since 2008. The corporation has very specific criminal history check requirements for national service participants, including grant-funded staff and volunteers. And some of you may have sat in on a presentation from Brian at a regional conference or online about these the National Service Criminal History Check. So criminal history checks touch so many areas of project management, and you can find resources and references in several of the chapters within the handbook. So chapter 1, 2, 5, on and on, all have references to criminal history check resources. But supplement to the handbook, A12, is where you're going to find all of the information put together. So again, this is a starting point, and kind of, as Brian said, you're at the door to get into further information and more specific information that you need to manage your program. The most up-to-date information will be found by using the links in this section, and you can link directly to the National Service Criminal History Check webpage on the National Network, as well as the Code of Federal Regulations. So here's our criminal history check resources on the Knowledge Network. At the end of the supplement, A12, there are even more resources and a whole list of links that you can use to inform your policies on criminal background checks.
It's a long supplement. There we go.
There's a lot of information, and it is very useful. So we have a lot of resources here in the supplement A12. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brian potentially for some questions and to talk about next steps.
Great. Thanks very much, Tara. So I did see we got a couple of questions in here. Thanks, Deb. First, she asked, where is the NOFA? And then I gave her some information in the chat about a NOFA, and it looks like she's looking for a different NOFA. It's actually kind of a good thing to discuss, because I'll be the first to say that there's something that these handbooks are not so good at, and handbooks are not going to be quite so good at time sensitive things. You know, if there's a competition for a particular period of time, or something like Senior Corps Week, we do update these things fairly often. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but we don't necessarily update them every day, because if we did that, then you would have to go back and get a fresh copy every day. So for Deb, looks like she's asking about a specific Senior Companion Program NOFA. If you're not familiar with the term NOFA, it stands for Notice of Funding Availability. And for the Foster Grandparent Program and Senior Companion Program, those things are actually state-specific. So if you're looking for a specific opportunity there, I would go ahead and get in touch with the relevant CNCS state office. Competitions have a certain start date and a certain end date, so you won't see competitions advertised in here, for example. Instead, you might find information about a competition generally. So thanks very much for that question, Deb. I haven't seen any other questions come in. Please let me know if you do have any other questions, and we will pick them up. And we've got 15 minutes here, and I'm just going to go over a couple of final notes about what's next for these things. First, as I mentioned, hey, Jane, did you want to jump in on that?
Oh, sorry. I just thought for Deb's question, you might want to just mention, we could mention that on the Managing Senior Corps Grants webpage, it has the invitations to apply and past notices for grants. So if you're doing a renewal or that sort of thing, I think maybe what triggered the question was Tara mentioned the Appendix B, and that can be found on the Managing Senior Corps Grants page. So anyway, sorry, I just didn't want to leave if that might help.
Great, thanks, Jane. And Deb says, the instructions tell you to refer to the notice. Really, when you're in a competition setting, you're going to have a notice of funding opportunity or an invitation to apply. And then the various documents will refer back to one of the other of those. So if you're going into a renewal period, as Jane said, you're going to be looking at that invitation to apply. We do want to move on and just talk a little bit about what happens next with these things, how we keep the handbooks up to date. As I mentioned, we just updated them in January, and going forward, we're going to update them quarterly, which means come April, you can expect a new version of the handbooks to come out. What happens in a new version of the handbooks? Well, we're going to correct some things. We find some broken links. We find some typos, things like that. We may add information. So, for example, one change that happened between the summer revision, the big revision from 2008, and the current revision is Litmus, the learning management system, came online. And we have this new place for all of our senior core courses. Well, you can now find Litmus information in the handbook because we saw that was coming and we're able to put it in the handbook. But where we actually get most of our handbook updates are from all of you. And you can tell us anything that you want to change in the handbook, any errors that you notice, by sending an email to seniorcorpshandbooks@cns.gov. And I am actually dropping that in the chat box. And we do monitor this. We do use it. Many of the changes that you will see that came from our last revision, that came from that summer revision, were because you let us know that there were some things that needed to change. These are, big 200-page documents, and we're working hard to keep them fresh, to keep them accurate, to keep them timely. And we really appreciate your assistance in that effort. So if you find something, a broken link, an error, or something you just think that we should add, please let us know. We won't always be able to do it right away, but we'll always try to do whatever we can to make these things as useful for you as possible. The other big line of work that we'll keep trying to do with these handbooks goes back to that door function that I mentioned earlier. We do really want to make sure that this is a portal, a doorway to all of the different information and guidance that's available. I still often see new forms of guidance that I wasn't aware of, new tools that have been developed and maybe fell by the wayside. And as we go forward, we're going to try to make sure that we really collect all of it. And I also want to say organize all of it. I've been in my role as Senior Corps Program Officer for training for just about 6-7 months now. And I do think that we can do some more to organize all of the many resources. Jane and Tara really pushed us leap years ahead in that effort in going through and completing the major revision that they did. And now we're just going to keep building on that and making sure that you've got routes to all the information you need through this portal, through this door. That's all that we had really in terms of formal content here today. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Melody asks a great question. Is there an easy way to see the changes made each quarter? Tara and Jane, do you want to take that or should I take that?
You go ahead, Brian.
Okay, great. So the answer is yes, and we'll go ahead and look at it. So I'm in the RSVP handbook here, but it's the same for all of them. And what you'll see, I'm going to start at the front page here. And what you'll see is the very first thing in the handbook is a change log. And the change log starts off by saying edits made in this version, and it has the month, and then it lists them one by one. Some of these will be more substantial than others, right? So I'm looking at number 5 here. The capitalization of the names of the senior companion program and foster grandparent programs have been standardized. That's not likely to keep anyone awake at night, but we wanted to note it because whenever we make a change, we want to note it. But then you will see some more substantive changes, like what's a good example? We edited the text on insurance requirements just to make it clearer. We just found that wasn't necessarily the most streamlined portion. So we edited that just to make it clear. Again, no changes to the actual policy happened. And this was a point that Jane made well, I think, earlier. You're not really going to see changes to policy come out in the handbook because the handbook can't change policy. But you will find whenever we make a clarification here. Christine asks if there's a changelog in the FGP and SCP handbook. Yes, there is. There's a chance maybe you're not looking at the most recent version, but we'll go ahead and we'll pull one of those up just to see. We've been in the FGP handbook mostly, so I'm going to pull up the SCP handbook. You can get to the most recent version by going to the Managing Senior Corps Grants page. I'm going to click on that link for the SCP handbook. And again, it'll be the first thing you see after the title page. So Christine, just make sure that you're going to the Managing Senior Corps Grants page and using the most updated link because that is something that we're doing standard across all of the handbooks. Are there any other questions? Oh, Christine asks, how do I know which version of the handbook I'm looking at? Well, another change that you'll see is we number the versions. So there's version 2017.1, which is the version that was released in January 2017. Prior versions may not have had that number because that's one of the changes that we just put in. So if you don't see a 2017 on it, it's not the most up-to-date version. And more importantly, if you want to find the most up-to-date version, the guaranteed way to do it is to go to the Managing Senior Corps Grants page and use the link there. That is the guaranteed way to find the most up-to-date version at all times. But from here on out, the versions are numbered with the year and the quarter. And you can always just look at that to know which version you're looking at. Okay. Tara and Jane, we're still open for questions here if anybody puts anything in, but I just want to see if either of you have any final thoughts.
No, I just hope that everyone will send your feedback and questions, or if something's not really clear, to the email address that Brian mentioned.
Yes, and we really worked to make these handbooks easy to use and as clear as we could, and as a tool for you all to use. So we definitely will take your feedback and suggestions.
Okay. Thanks very much to you both. I really can't tell all of you out there in Senior Corps world how much work Jane and Tara have put into these resources. They really are phenomenal resources. You'll see as we get ready to sign off on the screen a quick little survey pop up. We do want to know how we're doing, so please just go ahead and answer. It's just a one-question survey to just let us know if we are meeting your needs and expectations. Thank you all for joining us. I see Kathleen put in a very kind comment there. We do still have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions. Okay, thanks to everyone who's putting feedback in. Please keep that up. And I'm seeing some great feedback. Thanks all. That's very wonderful to hear. But make sure you give us the tough feedback too. We want that too. So please do use that email address and hold us accountable and make sure that we're still making this as easy for you as possible. With that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you one more time to our presenters, Tara and Jane. And thanks to all of you for all the work that you do and coming and spending some time with us this afternoon.